God is the only artist that uses life itself as his medium. Not just time and space and matter and energy that he used to string the cosmos in place and set this earth on course. I'm talking about life itself. He's the master painter with the brush in his hand, and that which he dips into is so complex. Sometimes it's joy, sometimes it's peace, sometimes it's prosperity that he's using to display his majesty in our lives, but other times it's pain or suffering, struggle. This is because God is using human beings as his masterpiece. Us. We are his greatest creations, his greatest work, his passion and his love. And he is an artist that will not compromise on us. He's still working. And that through which he shapes us and molds us is life. Life itself. His medium is one that only a great and wonderful and powerful and beautiful God could use. And so today, if you will allow me, I want to look at life just a little bit. I want to show how God can use it to help us. And I think by the end of it all, you'll have an appreciation, much like I do, of every single masterpiece that God is at work creating in this world, and that he will one day finish when it's all said and done. Welcome to Echo Ministry. I'm Vaughn. I want to take some time today and look in the book of Genesis, around chapter 37, and I want to look at the life of Joseph. Because if ever there was a life in which you can look at and the presence and activity of God becomes obvious by the circumstances that this man goes through and overcomes, it's Joseph. He always had God's favor. This was undeniable, but it's a confusing thing when you read the text and God's interaction with man, because despite his favor, Joseph went into real hardship. You see, because he was so favored by his biological father, and because of his knowledge, and because he was so special, his brothers hated him. His brothers, who were all older, couldn't stand. Well, because one of the older brothers intervened, his life was own family. They then told their father that he had died. They were shepherds, and they said that a wild beast had ravaged this boy. They even took his tunic and dipped it in blood and gave it to their father as evidence that he had lost his life. So as far as his family, his father was concerned, he was gone. Betrayal was how his path started. And God was just putting the brush to the canvas. You see, despite this absolute loss in his life, God's favor was evident. And in fact, here at Genesis 39. And I want to read for you in Genesis chapter 39, verses 1 through 5, really quickly. Because I think when we do, it'll give us an idea in God's life, in Joseph's life. in verse 1, it says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph, favor in his sight, became his personal servant, and he made him overseer of his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. It came about that from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, in the house and in the field." There's that favor again. You see, in struggle and in pain and through loss, virtue is often developed. Faith is tested and strengthened. And it's oftentimes these are necessary things to prepare you for the office that God is going to put you into. And that's what we see in Joseph's life. God beginning to form and shift things in a way that only he can. He's sold into slavery, and yet as a slave, he prospers more than he could ever imagine. However, the painting is far from done. As we continue to read, he's betrayed again. You see, this Egyptian official had a wife and found Joseph desirable and tried to seduce him, and because he refused her, she lied. And so this man tried to attack her, tried to take advantage of her. And Joseph, despite his righteousness, despite his favor from God, found himself in prison. Well, where you are and who you are two very, very different things, because even in prison he began to prosper. Even in that prison he found favor with the guards and was put in charge over all works, all offices within the prison itself. Two very special guests came into this prison. The first was the cupbearer for the Pharaoh. The second was the baker for the Pharaoh. And they began to have very, very troubling dreams. And they came to Joseph, and Joseph said, doesn't interpretation belong to God? But tell me your dream, and I'll interpret it, because God is with me. And if he's causing you to have these dreams, it's for a reason. The longer you live in life, the more you begin to recognize God changing your life and manipulating things around you, and God at work. And you begin to recognize opportunities to glorify God. And you begin to recognize your deliverance at hand. But I do not think that Joseph had an idea of just how much God was going to deliver him. In these dreams, the cupbearer was told that he was going to be restored to his office with the Pharaoh. And Joseph said, you know what, just don't forget me when you get there, because I'm in prison and I don't deserve this. The baker, however, was told that you would pass away. And both of these things absolutely came to pass. Well, the cupbearer is restored to his office, forgets about our Joseph, and he spends 2 years in prison before the Pharaoh himself has dreams that are so troubling. It's about the crumbling of a nation. He summons all his magicians and all his spiritual men, and no one could interpret this dream for him. And he was furious, to the point that he was going to begin to take people's lives. And finally, the cupbearer remembers Joseph. Well, prison. After being betrayed, after being sold into slavery, all of these things are coming to pass, and yet God is still at work molding and shaping the life so that Joseph in this position can now go, I have a way out. The cupbearer tells Pharaoh about Joseph, and Joseph interprets the dream. He tells him about what's going to happen in Egypt. 7 years of prosperity, followed by 7 years of absolute famine. Store up grain for yourselves. Let us prepare, because when the famine comes, Egypt won't survive unless we do. Pharaoh immediately recognizes this, immediately recognizes God's favor, and appoints him to the house. Pharaoh said to Joseph, only on the throne will I be greater than you. Everything else will be in your charge. Because God is causing you to prosper so much, please take care of everything for me, and I'll just be Pharaoh. Sold into slavery, and now he's standing there, and only the Pharaoh himself is above him in Egypt. That's what happens when God begins to paint in your life. When God, the artist, begins to create a storyline and create virtue. You see, I talked about the different colors that God's painting with. He talks about joy and prosperity and peace and love. But you see so much pain in Joseph's life, almost to the point where you're thinking, if this is God's favor, I don't want it. But because we can, in Scripture, look at Joseph's life in totality, we can look back and go, it's obvious what God was doing. Yes, you had to go through pain. Yes, you had to go through suffering because you had to be appointed to this office. But it's interesting to note that when God begins to change your life, it's not just in your life that he's working. There's a reason why God does every single thing he does, and this is no different. Joseph is appointed to an office, and yet the famine begins to hit the world, Egypt and the surrounding areas at that time, and because of his position, he's able to save the very family that betrayed him. He's able to ensure that his people don't perish. Because God elevated him to a point where he had his hands and had control over things, he was able to ensure the survival of his nation. I wonder, when he was walking in chains and being sold, did he have any idea where he was going? I wonder, when he was betrayed and sent into prison and sat there waiting on God, day after day after day after day, if he had any idea what the final picture would be. I wonder if standing there and the famine hit, if he realized that God was still not done. And let's look at Genesis 45. Because if we look at Genesis 45, and I want to read chapters 5 through 13 for you. Now Joseph is speaking to his brothers who betrayed him. He revealed himself, finally. The brother that you sold into slavery is the very one now that you have come bowing to, asking for help. But his response is quite beautiful. You see, he says this. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, which are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve you, a remnant in the earth, to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it is not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his household and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord over all of Egypt. Come down to me and do not delay. You shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. Therefore I will also provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, and you and your household and all that you have would be impoverished. Behold your eyes and see, that the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that my mouth which is speaking to you. Now you must tell my father of all my splendor in Egypt, and all that you have seen, and all of you must hurry and bring my father down here. It's interesting how in the end the entire picture is made clear. And in that there becomes a form of worship that only people who have really struggled can give God. Only people who have really experienced pain can give. Only people who have surrendered their lives over to God and allowed him the activity in their lives can stand back and go, I never would have seen this coming. But now that I have the whole picture, I can see that God was with me every step of the way. We are absolute works of art. That's the reason why God is so concerned about our conduct. That's the reason why God is so concerned about the way we live our lives, where we go and who we associate ourselves with, because he's not done making his masterpiece. I was reading some C.S. Lewis, and he talked about God's commandments and God's teachings, and he said something that was extremely interesting. He said that oftentimes we will find ourselves wondering why God is so strict on us, wondering why God puts us through things that we're going through, and why we experience pain or suffering, or why we experience struggle. But when we begin to ask God to take it easy on us, we're asking him for less love, not more. Less love, not more. Oftentimes, we wish we were a sketch on a piece of paper, just something that God would just throw together and cast away, but that's not the case. We're extremely important to him. So he won't stop until every single detail is perfect. He is truly a master at creating. He's perfect at what he does. And he will not stop until every single thing is exactly where it should be. If we look at Joseph's life, we can see an example of this. If we look at what Joseph has gone through, the example is made extremely clear. Pain, suffering, struggle, success, betrayal, pain, suffering, struggle, absolute highest office you could possibly achieve. And you say, why did God bring you through all of that and put you there? And then you realize that Joseph saved his family. From Joseph's family became all the tribes of Israel. Came King David, came our Savior, came salvation for the entire world. Do you see how God begins to act in one person and that ripple effect? God is truly the only artist that uses life itself as his medium, that is able to change the way things are and the way things will ever be by his action and by his power and by his grace. I'm here to tell you now that because of Christ, we can all become works of art that will last forever. And yes, there's going to be times in which God is going to be laying his hands on your life and removing things that you thought were dear. And sometimes he's going to be shaping and molding and shifting, and it's going to feel uncomfortable. I've made this analogy before, but it's much like a surgeon. I'm coming back now from back surgery myself, and it was extremely painful what I had to go through. Being cut open and having him shift me around and shaving bone and trimming things, it's traumatic to the body. But you don't realize until you've been closed up and you're allowed to heal the change that's going to be. My quality of life will be better forever now. It's the same thing when God begins to lay his hands on you. And when you began to see him, the artist, manipulate his medium, which is life itself, and change everything for the better. Because of Christ, we can be a masterpiece that lasts forever. And that is exactly what God wants for us. I want to read just a psalm for you now, a couple of verses. Psalm 139, 14 and 16. And I think a few of you already know where I'm going. And here the psalmist says, I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were written all the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. You see, I've talked about before how God creates us and how he molds us and how we can be remade. But as the psalmist says here, it's not just me that you knew, God. It's my life and every single day of it. Before I was even born, you knew what the days would bring that would shape me into the person that you wanted in your kingdom for all eternity. If you're going through pain right now, God's not done painting yet. If you're going through suffering, God is not done painting yet. If you are in a place of success, look around you and ask yourself, why did God go through all of that work to put you in that position? Is there work to be done for you? Absolutely. Because at the end of it all, God puts you in position and hands the brush over and says, now it's your turn. I want you to be a representative on this earth. If you're in a place of position, help those around you. Represent God in a way that's amazing. And when they say, where did you get this love? Where did you get this peace? Where did you get this hope? Where did you get this perseverance? You could say, you know, I looked back over my life and I saw God using just those things to make my life amazing. God is able. God is at work. God is still creating. And I am so grateful for every single one of you that has taken the time to watch this very, very short sermon today. God bless you. And I pray strongly in my heart for those of you who are considering Christ now. Let him work for you. Let him into your life, because I can tell you firsthand that if he can shape and mold me and change my life for the better, he can do it for anyone. God bless you, and thank you for watching Echo Ministry.